Here's a guy with PragerU to explain how bootstraps are the key to maturity.
We all know it takes a long time to grow up, not only biologically but psychologically. There's a saying among psychiatrists that it takes 50 years to overcome the first 20. Here's the good news. Unlike other species, we are not restrained by our instincts alone. We are able to learn from our parents, our experiences, and our culture. Here's the bad news. Nobody matures without effort. It doesn't happen naturally. It takes a lot of hard work. But what does it mean to be mature? Good question. So let's answer it. I have identified 5 characteristics of maturity. If you work to possess them all, you will have a happier, deeper, and more productive life. 1. Taking control. Of course, you had no choice what era you were born in, or where you were born, or who your parents are. But with each year of childhood, you attain more and more capacity to chart your own course. Yes, society and fate play a role, but cultivating your ability and willingness to make your own decisions expands your ability to influence how your life unfolds. The only way to achieve maturity is to take charge of your life. Nothing empowers you as much as exercising that control. Refusing to act, waiting to be rescued, and seeing yourself as a victim are sure signs of immaturity.
Telling people not to see themselves as victims is a very convenient way for victimizers to let themselves off the hook. However, lots of folks who aren't victimizers like this worldview as well, because if you believe it, I imagine it can make you feel very powerful. If you're never a victim and you can keep the circumstances that are out of your control from holding you back in life, then that implies that everything that really matters must still be in your control, and the systemic limitations that are placed on you don't ultimately matter. It's a delusion of grandeur. It's a power fantasy. You know, like the kind a child would have. This is like the clean your room mantra that conservatives love so much. It asks you to ignore all of the societal factors that contribute to making your room unclean in the first place. And they don't even apply it consistently. When you bring up a problem they don't care about, they tell you to take responsibility and clean your room. But if a problem affects them, it's cultural phenomena like postmodern neo-Marxism or the SJWs that are to blame.
2. Taking responsibility. I mean this in 2 ways. The first way is simply to acknowledge that you're responsible for what you do. If you make a mistake, acknowledge it. Don't alibi and don't blame others.
Well, you probably should alibi if you actually have a legitimate alibi, like if you did something illegal but did it because you were defrauded or entrapped into doing it. Also, this is a principle that conservatives rarely apply to themselves. That's why they defend things like qualified immunity for police when someone in their custody ends up dying.
This is an easy thing to say, but we all know it's very hard to do. A mature person does it. A mature person takes responsibility. Second is the willingness to take on obligations and fulfill them. For example, I got married and took on obligations to my wife and children. I have ethical obligations to my patients and my profession, even on days that I might not feel like it. A mature person doesn't see obligations as burdens, but as something he willingly accepts and sees through to fulfillment.
Unless it's an obligation to provide to folks who can't provide for themselves. No, when conservatives, like the folks at PragerU, tell you they want you to take on obligations, they mean that they want you to take obligations out of their hands and into yours. And if they're obligations that you don't have the capacity to fulfill, well, too bad for you. I agree that real maturity means taking on obligations. But one of those obligations is for those with greater wealth with which to care for people, to actually care for people who have less wealth to care for themselves and others. To shirk taking responsibility not just for yourself and your family, but also your community is a sign of immaturity, not maturity.
3. Containing emotions. I would never suggest that you should ignore your emotions, but you have to learn to contain them. Immature people lash out at their boss or their coworker if something doesn't go their way, or argue with their spouse when they come home, or turn to alcohol or drugs because of a rough day. I often tell my patients that maturity can be measured by how much anxiety they can tolerate without acting out inappropriately against themselves or others. Mature people express their emotions in the right place, at the right time, in the right way. We are emotional beings, but we should never let go of the steering wheel. That is, we need to learn how and when to contain our emotions.
This is a standard conservatives only ever apply to the poor and powerless. Notice the example of a guy lashing out at his boss or coworker. I think we all understand why he didn't use the example of a boss lashing out at an employee or a customer lashing out at a waiter or a cashier. Petulant emotional outbursts really only have consequences if you are an underling. They don't if you're a CEO or a high-paying client or the president. Conservatives have absolutely no expectation of people in those positions having emotional control. But everyone who takes orders is expected to have an inhumanly blunted emotional affect. Only someone with a child's level of naivety could expect that of people. A lot of these tips on how to be mature are really tips about how to deal with adversity without asking for the unfair systemic causes of that adversity to be removed. A common retort when you point out unfairness to people who benefit from unfairness is, "Life's not fair." As if that gives them license to be unfair themselves, or if it makes it okay to ignore unfairness that can be corrected. That's what a lot of the advice given in this video seems to aim at. To everyone who helps me out on Patreon, you're a big help. Thanks so much.